Hello, I'm Chris Chapman, President of the IIC. I'm figuring that it is a good afternoon to the overwhelming majority of our regulator participants, but in any event, welcome all to our 2022 Asia Telecommunications and Media Forum. We really do know how much our members and colleagues from the international regulatory community value the opportunity to meet together at a regional regulators forum, an RRF as we call it, which takes place on the day prior to its running mate, the Telecommunications Media Forum. So we welcome regulator members, not only from the Asia Pacific region, but most encouragingly, we also welcome IIC members from Africa, Europe, and the Americas who have registered to participate in this week's discussions and to hear from their peers in Asia Pacific. This region has a vital emerging role to play in driving and informing agendas. Although we're hosting the forum online this year, hopefully for the last time, we know you will make the most of the opportunity to hear a wide range of experiences from countries large and small across Asia Pacific. The theme for this RRF is sharing regulatory best practice, rising to the challenges of digital transformation and the converged telecom tech media ecosystem. For me, two things to highlight. Firstly, the RRF is a roundtable, albeit online, to facilitate the sharing of best regulatory practice. So there is your unequivocal invitation to participate, share, inform, contest. And secondly, we're moving from digital to the need to transform, and with it, now deal with the reality of and the challenges presented by an ever-broadening telecom tech media ecosystem. The regulator's role just keeps getting more complex with more and more stakeholders. In my view, the toughest role amongst the multi-parties involved. At this RRF and within that context, today we'll be focusing on three key areas: protecting consumers and citizens, connectivity for all, and driving economic growth and societal benefits. That's all. I now welcome and hand over to Andrea Millward-Hargrave, the IIC's previous much beloved Director General, who's moderating this first panel, which includes my former colleague, Nerita O'Loughlin, Chair of the ACMA. So hi in advance, Nerita. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I'm very pleased to be able to moderate this opening session of this year's Regional Regulators Forum. And the issue we will consider, protecting consumers and citizens, is of course one of the key issues, along with supporting industry, to a regulator's role. I've asked the panelists to briefly outline some of the initiatives their organizations have put in place, especially at this time of continuing global disruption. We have, as you've seen from the agenda, 3 panelists, and I'll introduce them here briefly in the order in which they'll speak. We have Tan Tun Aun, who is the Deputy Director General, Posts and Telecommunications Department of Myanmar, as well as a member of the Competition Commission, and he's been much involved in the opening up of the sector. We have Dr. Wei Chung Teng, who's a commissioner in the National Communications Commission of Taiwan, and also a professor with wide-ranging research interests, particularly in network-related issues, and also, I see, virtual reality. Nerita O'Loughlin is chair of the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the ACMA, and also an associate member of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. And she has a series of very interesting challenges and legislative changes ahead. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Aun.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your introduction. First of all, I would like to offer my appreciation to IIC for organizing this Asia Telecommunication and Media Forum and also inviting me to be a part of this year's event. As the introduction, I would like to briefly talk about the sector reform journey, as I call it, for Myanmar, and the challenges that we have faced, particularly with respect to the protection of consumer interests. We won't fully understand the Myanmar's telecom sector reform process without having understanding of the status just before that. Myanmar was the least connected and least affordable economies in the Asia-Pac region until 2012. As recently as 2012, only 4 to 5% of our 50 million populations had access to any type of telecommunication services, including mobiles. And during those times, a mobile SIM card could cost you around a whopping $2,000 per SIM. And internet was also available only to less than 1% of the total population. Just to give you, a graphical comparison, Laos and Cambodia, Myanmar's neighbors with approximately the same level of economic developments at that time, had a tele-density of over 90%. This prompted our government to take drastic actions. We went straight into full liberalization of the entire telecom sector, rather than going through a staged liberalization process, which I think most of our regulator colleagues in the room are familiar with. We kickstarted with the adoption of Telecom Law in 2013, followed by the international tender process for the selection of 2 mobile operators. It was a highly successful tender process, and we had over 90% participated in the process. Finally, we awarded Ooredoo and Telenor licenses for mobile operations. It was followed up by the 4th license to a consortium of Viettel and local companies in 2016. Subsequently to this, the adoption of the new licensing framework and the liberalization of the international gateway services completed the liberalization in 2018. Government had specific targets for sector reform. The primary objectives at that time were, number 1, to increase the tele-density of the country from around 5% at that time to 80% in 5 years' time. 2 is to enhance the affordability. And 3 is to allow the ability of choice from the service provider and from the services being offered. The liberalization was a highly successful one as we achieved our initial reform objectives in less than a decade. We have done remarkably well in terms of improving connectivity. We achieved tele-density of over 90% in 2018, just as we celebrated the 4th anniversary of Ooredoo Myanmar and Telenor, as well as the 1st anniversary of the 4th license. Today, our tele-density is at 125% of the population and over 110% internet penetrations. Myanmar also ranked one of the most affordable nations for broadband connectivities in the region, with a price mark of $0.5 per gigabit. And this was our achievement. This remarkable development was possible because we gave full rein to market competition, and our regulatory framework is designed specifically for market competition. On the other hand, we were unprepared for a whole range of issues coming out of this hyper competition in the sector, most often at the expense of consumer interests. First of all, unfortunately, the law, unlike other modern legal frameworks, is not convergent. And the regulator is not a convergent regulator, creating a legal vacuum in terms of regulating the digital contents, including the social media as well as the e-commerce platforms. The primary objectives of the improving connectivity and affordability was achieved, but again, it was done in a way that we didn't pay proper attention to the consumer protection. So as a result, by 2021, telecom services became the 3rd most hated industries in Myanmar, according to the in terms of number of complaints received, according to the statistics by Myanmar National Competition Agency. So this is an important message to us. We learned it in a hard way, right? When we try to overcome the affordability and the improving the connectivity, it is important that we don't overlook the importance of customer and consumer protections. In response, we had issued several instructions and guidelines, including tariff and consumer protection guidelines, instruction for value-added services for consumer protection, also instruction in terms of bill shock protection guidelines. The regulator had adopted more of a collaborated approach, working together with the industry as well as other competent regulators like national competition and national consumer protection agencies. So as we move more towards digitalization, and towards digital platforms and services in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we move more towards the digital transformations, the protection of our citizens and consumers become more of an issue. We are now focusing around the issues around the social media, scams, fake news, as well as cyber incidents, as well as on the quality of service. Yeah, that is for my introduction, and I look forward to joining the panel discussions at a later stage. Thank you, Andrea, and back to you.
That's super. Thank you very much. There'll be lots of overlapping and lots of discussion, I hope, on that. I'd like to hand over now to Dr. Teng, who will pick up some of these issues that have been raised and speak particularly to Taiwan's very specific initiatives put in place to protect its consumers and citizens, as well as, I'm sure, touch on various issues because of the pandemic. Over to you, Dr. Teng.
Thank you, Andrea. And first of all, I also would like to express my appreciation for the invitation of the IIC, such that I have the opportunity to meet with regulators around the world, and I am I hope that we can have a meaningful discussion in this panel. So I would like to take about 5 minutes to introduce some experience in recent Taiwan. So since the last December, there is a third wave of COVID-19, and till now there are around 550 new cases. But in yesterday we already suppressed the number into 2. So hopefully we will today I wish that today the number will decrease into 0. And to handle the COVID-19 disease pandemic, NCC have cooperated with the Center of Disease Control, the CDC of Taiwan, to launch and maintain a system called 1922 SMS contact tracing system. The way that the system work is that every citizen holding a mobile phone, when you want to enter a bus, a taxi, a shop, and you just pick up your phone number and scan the QR code tab in the front door, and it will derive to the a show message and go into number 1922, and this record will be stored in the centralized database holding by the biggest telecommunication service provider in Taiwan, Chunghwa Telecom, for 28 days. So every time when one new case found, the CDC is able to utilize this database to notify, to warn the other possible citizen to quarantine themselves. And NCC also help to pay about $1 million on this cooperation. And another thing is that on the other hand, CDC is also making great progress on the vaccine. So currently the vaccine coverage rate of 1 shot, 2 shot, and 3 shot are about 81%, 74%, and 23% of population respectively. And another case I would like to introduce is that since year 2016, NCC also cooperate with the Central Weather Bureau to maintain and to fine-tune public warning system. So according to this system, when the CWB predict that an earthquake is about to happen, it will use the cell phone broadcasting to deliver a show message to every citizen. And in last year, we already fine-tuned this system such that only the people residing in the country that with a semantic intensity scale 4.0 or higher will receive the warning message. So only the people who really need to be aware of this earthquake will receive this message. And the final thing is that NCC also helped the telco companies to settle more than 240 fixed base stations and deployed 40 remote base stations in remote areas, such that when earthquake happen and the power is down, then this kind of the station can equip with the electric generator and is able to function for 72 hours when the power is down. And so that's at first I want to the experience of Taiwan I want to show, and I will hand it back to you, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very interesting. One question that I have is you said the NCC has helped pay for creating this system, which is what we would call possibly a test and trace system. Who is it paying?
The cost is not enough because when people sending out the SMS, and of course it has costs, and so this budget is paid to the 5 telecommunication companies in Taiwan.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Right, well, first question down. So Narida, I'd like to hand over to you, please. And I look forward very much to hearing some of the many coming issues and how the ACMA is dealing with them. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Chris, and thank you to the IIC for the invitation. I do take this opportunity to register Australia's grave concern about the dire and deteriorating situation in Myanmar. As we mark 1 year since the military coup in Myanmar, Australia reiterates our calls on the military regime to cease violence, engage in dialogue, and release all those arbitrarily detained, including Australian Professor Sean Turnell. We also urge the military regime to end its obstruction of the right to privacy. Individuals have the right to privacy both online and offline that they can enjoy without interference or attack. And we strongly support ASEAN's continued leadership to chart a course out of the crisis in Myanmar. As many of us, broadcasting and telco regulators right around the globe will have experienced, the COVID pandemic put pressure on the industries we regulate, the consumers who benefit from that regulate, and even ourselves as regulators. In the first 4 months of the pandemic, back in 2021, the ACMA received release requests from nearly every single peak body for the sectors that we regulate, as well as numerous individual entities. The requests concerned over 49 acts and instruments and more than 200 separate legislative provisions. COVID certainly caused us to explore how flexible our regulation was or wasn't, and how flexible we as the regulator were willing to be in the face of a pandemic which put more pressure than ever on our telco and broadcasting sectors, but needed to support the community and environment which was changing almost daily. We found that many of the protections in our law, even including things like mandatory consultation arrangements, prevented us from being able to quickly amend the law to accommodate quickly the changing environment. As a result, we generally relied on our discretion to agree to time-limited and conditional forbearance where it was justified, aiming to give industry certainty around what our expectations of the regulator would be, while also being able to give certainty to consumers and building in natural points of review, particularly at a time where telco services and broadcasting were more important than ever for people staying connected and living their lives. So as an example, we agreed to give telcos extra time to deal with things like complaints and financial hardship obligations, but we provided consumers making sure that they were not disadvantaged and had very clear time limits on the industry of how long extra time would be available and when things would return to normal operations. In that fast changing environment, and I know today we're talking about cooperation, The strength of our relationships we had with our stakeholders helped us to understand their experiences and emerging concerns, to get information quickly and to make and communicate clear decisions along the way. But also, I wanted to mention a few new initiatives aimed at online regulation in Australia that have proceeded apace during 2020 and 2021, and despite the COVID pandemic. And these are a very strong focus on misinformation and disinformation, and an expectation that digital platforms are taking action to address these harms. The Australian Voluntary Code of Practice around misinformation and disinformation is almost at its first year of implementation, with Digi, which is the local industry body, soon to start its first review. This is an outcomes-based code aimed at allowing platforms with very diverse business models to sign up and provide transparency about measures that they are committing to address misinformation and disinformation on their services, including the raft of misinformation and disinformation that we have seen around COVID-19 pandemic. Likewise, the world first news media bargaining code is also coming up to almost 1 year in operation. This code, written into our law, is designed to address the market imbalances between the digital platforms and news creators here in Australia. Since it was enacted, Facebook, now Meta, and Google, amongst others, are reported to have entered into a range of agreement with news creators and publishers to compensate them for the very first time for the news content that they distribute on their digital platforms. And finally, last month, significant reforms around online safety commenced, providing substantial new powers to the Office of the eSafety Commissioner, our colleague. These extend the Commissioner's powers to adults as well as children to address the harms that they experience online, including cyberbullying. It also sets up a clear set of expectations for online service providers, making them accountable for the safety of people who use their services. So just touching on a couple of things from COVID and also new initiatives in the Australian environment. We welcome always the opportunity to share our experiences, and we look forward to the conversation today. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much indeed, Nerida. There are lots of issues, and can I take advantage of my privilege as the moderator and just ask you a little bit about the News Media Bargaining Code. You talk about compensation for media organizations. I'm just interested, the underlying theme of your presentation, it seemed to me, was about collaboration, cooperation with industry across different regulatory agencies and with consumers. How do you actually arrive at things like the compensation issues, or you talked about regulatory forbearance, and the pandemic hasn't gone away, so presumably the time limits keep getting pushed back. How does the ACMA with its other colleagues actually come together? How do you work together, and what sort of fora are there for that?
Well, that's a small question, Andrea.
Yes, of course.
I think it depends on the circumstance. So in the COVID environment, we moved very quickly, possibly in the first couple of weeks, to establish a task force internally to manage all the different requests that we were getting from industry and their representatives, and to be able to allow the authority to gather information quickly, almost daily meetings with industry representatives and the major telcos and broadcasters to understand what they were facing, plus things like the production sector, who were experiencing almost total shutdown at that time, and how they were going to get up to speed. So really it was very much in time discussions and collaboration, and a task force to pull all that evidence together and advise the authority so that we could make decisions, so there was certainty, as I said, for the industry, but certainty for consumers about what they can expect from their providers. In relation to the misinformation code, we were heavily involved, although that's a self-regulatory code. We were very much engaged with Digi, the local industry representative group. We, in June 2020, actually put out a position paper on misinformation and disinformation, which was the regulators' view about what we would expect to see in a code developed by industry about the harms of disinformation and misinformation online. That was a very intense period of negotiation with Digi and the people of the organisation it represents. It's probably fair to say we didn't get everything we wanted in that code, but it's also fair to say that it gave industry a very clear view of where they needed to move towards, and we think the code benefited from the regulators' intervention.
Excellent. I'd like to open the panel up, please, so that we can have a discussion, and hopefully if you have any questions while you're out there listening in, please do join us. As Chris said at the opening, the whole purpose of the forum is it is a regulators forum, and we're here to hear your ideas, initiatives that you put in place, challenges, and to inform each other. So please do join us. I think one of the issues you've talked about is ensuring, you've talked about combating disinformation, particularly you've talked about complaints procedures, Alan talked about complaints procedures, and I know there's been a lot of work in not disinformation specifically, but in terms of various consumer related issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So things like spam, nuisance calls, things like that. Perhaps you'd like to talk about some of the issues, that some of the arrangements that have been put into place. Narita, I know that you have various memoranda of understanding with different agencies across the globe, and I know Taiwan may well do, as well as Myanmar. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about those sorts of issues, because they've been heightened, it seems to me, by the pandemic. Narita, if you start.
Thanks, Andrea. I totally agree. I think what we have seen over the period of the pandemic is such a significant increase in reports and losses from scam activity. In the Australian market, there was around about $176 million in losses reported in 2020, which was up from 143 million the year before. And I do think, scammers, as we all experience, are becoming very agile, they're adaptive, and they're absolutely relentless in our jurisdictions. I do think, like some of the discussion I had earlier about digital platforms, these are global issues. I think areas such as scams and spam are things where I think we all have concerns, and we all have similar views about this is an area of harm that we all need to tackle. So we've been working with our colleagues such as the CRTC in Canada, increasingly with the FCC, and of course including through UCENet, the international collaboration on unsolicited communication, for many years. And I think we see that there's opportunity to step up even more in that space to learn from each other about what we're doing. We've had an extensive task force established in Australia with our colleagues at the Competition and Consumer Commission, also the cyber security areas as well, to look at these areas and to work very closely with the telcos about what's new, what's different that we can try, what's different that telcos can try and learn internationally, that we can all work together. So it is an area that we think that there's ongoing potential for increased collaboration right across all our regulatory colleagues, and very happy to share our experiences in that area.
That's great, thank you. Taiwan, Myanmar, these been issues for you?
Okay, maybe I start. I have mentioned about the COVID-19 pandemic and how Taiwan is handling about the pandemic. And there, regarding to the telephone, the market, there was indeed been observed that the number of the robocall has increased in the last year dramatically, maybe at least 5 times of the 2 years ago. And NCC also started the second protocol provided by FCC 2 years ago. And however, the situation is the different from Taiwan to United States. Like in Taiwan, always the caller will pay. So so most of the people in Taiwan, they use application that get the help of the crowdsourcing to collect the illegit telephone numbers. And most of the scammer consider the system to fake the calling number too expensive. So in Taiwan, these people will send the SMS or you will use robocall, but the first thing they do is to seduce you to add him by a social media app called Line, very popular one in Korea and Japan. Yes, so and that will make the solution very not easier. So we are still studying how to make the scammer harder to establish the link between them and the victims. And we are also want to hear if there are a more possible solution in the other region.
Please, if you're listening in and have other solutions, please do join us and ask questions. Aun, you talked about complaints procedures, but they were very specifically about connectivity and access. I mean, do you have issues such as these concerns about some of the nuisance calls and things like that? Is that an issue in Myanmar? And of course, you have very different populations between the urban populations, as does Australia, of course, urban populations and rural populations.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yes, of course, although we are a newcomer, in joining these digital transformations, we do not have the luxury of being given the opportunity to avoid all these problems. So the scam calls and the problems that our the excellent panelists already discussed, it's also with Myanmar. So we are facing all those challenges, and the number of scam calls has increased dramatically since last year when we had this COVID pandemic. But we look at it from the two aspects. Number one is on the protection of citizens, citizens protection. It is more brighter in terms of who use the services. And that's the second is on the consumer and the subscriber protections. The persons who use or who acquire the service directly from the service providers which are licensed into our regulator. So these are two different approaches. Okay. But in terms of the citizens protection, we look at it from the aspect of the cybersecurity and network security, as well as on the protection of the scam calls and things like that. As I mentioned earlier, we use the industry collaborative approach. So we work with industry in coming up with the guidelines. So we have issued several guidelines to operators in order to tackle the scam calls or unsolicited the calls and messages. So this is some of the things that we are working together with the operator. And in terms of protecting the citizens from the network's elements on the network attacks and cyber attacks, we are working with the Cybersecurity Agency as well as with the Consumer Protection Agency. You also touch on one of the most important issues with regard to countries like Myanmar, which is getting more information into the rural populations and getting more connectivity to rural populations. The competition has brought in the connectivity to over 90% of the country into connections with different range of digital services. But we still have large populations which is not has accessibility to digital services. So we had just started the universal service regime, which look at not only connectivity but also bringing in digital literacy and also digital capacity building efforts into the rural populations as well. But it is very new, and the government has just started and launched the universal service program. Thank you very much, Andrea. Back to you.
Okay, as certainly Narita and many colleagues know, digital literacy, media literacy are absolutely key to my interests and heart, actually. So it's a very important area. When we were discussing coming on to this, we're discussing the panel, I was asking about how the emergency services aspect that have been raised by Taiwan were transmitted. Taiwan had the earthquakes, and of course in Australia you've had fires and floods that you have systems in place for. I'm not sure what there is necessarily in terms of natural disasters, other than the pandemic, if that's a natural disaster, in Myanmar, but the different media that are involved, and that goes back to the rural urban population type questions. I mean, when we talked about Taiwan, you know, do you use the radio, for example? And Dr. Teng almost laughed at me. Whereas, of course, in Australia, it's very important. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about the importance, if they are, of non-digital media in your different marketplaces. And things like the news bargaining code, therefore, is of great interest to me. Who'd like to start? Maybe I should start with you, Dr. Teng, because radio didn't seem to really register in terms of alerting people.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the.
I'm very old-fashioned.
I do listen to radio every day when I drive to my working place, my office. So, however, it is at first in Taiwan nowadays we have about 23 million population, but currently we have 29 phone numbers. So, which means that everyone holding 1.3 smartphones. And that's why when NCC is considering how to announce the emergency warnings to people, we at first would like to utilize the smartphone. But yes, you are right. Many citizens is listening to radio and watching TV. So first of all, we do utilize the TV channel, especially for every news channel and the most popular TV channels, and we acquired their advertisement time slots to broadcast some emergent news. Yes, okay. Yes, that's true. But not yes, radio will be. I don't know. For the past 3.5 years, I've been a commissioner. I don't even have a report nowadays what's the population of the Taiwan that listen to radio. Maybe we should do a survey again. Yes, thank you very much.
Narita.
Thank you, Dr. Teng. In early 2020, just before the pandemic struck, Australia was had quite extensive and horrendous bushfires, and you know, we live in a country that is prone to floods and bushfires and all sorts of natural phenomena. What we found, and following that bushfire event, the ACMA did do a review for the minister around the resilience of telecommunications infrastructure, particularly in regional areas, and what we could learn from that experience. And what we found was that in most cases, fixed line was okay, unless the fire actually went into the pits. Mobile infrastructure was specifically very badly damaged. Broadcasting infrastructure, not so much, because broadcasting towers in Australia, our broadcasting system is predominantly terrestrial and free-to-air still, and those towers are big towers on the top of big hills. The community experience in those areas is that we do use as our colleagues do, telcos will push out messages via SMS about local conditions. But what we did find in many of those areas is that power failed. So if power failed, those who were reliant on perhaps satellite or fixed wireless, or even if their modems had run out of power, or indeed their mobile phones had run out of power, or there wasn't a satellite phone available in the local community, there was no power. And this is where we found that radio came into its own. Either that radio could, particularly AM radio, such an old-fashioned notion, AM radio would travel for long distances across local areas, but also what we did find is people were reliant, because of the circumstances, on battery-powered radio, which was the way that they could get their news and information. Much more localised. Most of these fires were really localised, so there was a challenge for telcos to localise sufficiently with their SMS, but our national broadcasters, particularly the ABC, also stepped up into that to make sure that people were getting local information. So we're still finding that in circumstances, there are some communities who have to rely on analogue to get the information they need in a time of great crisis.
I think the localization is interesting, and that's something that they're saying in Taiwan. You know, it's only when you get to a certain level that you need to start alerting people rather than panicking people, which I think is very interesting. Is this a sort of issue that you have to deal with in Myanmar, those sorts of disasters, and how do you get out to the people in the rural areas where you said there isn't great connectivity and access?
Right. Again, this is also a problem that Myanmar is not relieved from having this impact. I remember vividly on the 2013-14, tsunami, which struck the country very badly. And from that time on, we also had the coordinated approach towards getting information, to rural populations. Unfortunately, at that time, the connectivity was not so very good. And therefore, we also use different approaches in terms of from broadcasting media, the TV and radio, as well as later on when we have this improved connectivity to rural community, we use hybrid approach. We try to dispense information through digital means. But one of the funny thing is in most of the rural populations, the rural population use the digital services when they want to, for example, look into the news from the Facebook, and they switch off. So they were not used to always on digital services by the mobile operators. So they switch off one they have used. So it was usually a failure when we try to send digital information to the smart devices. So what we have to do is we have to work collaboratively with the industry, with the operators, to also deliver SMS. But for now, the Broadcasting Ministry, as I told you, the Myanmar regulator is not the convergent regulator yet. So from the broadcasting and other media, it's another ministry and another regulator. They also try to work together with the industry to deliver the informations, not only regarding the disaster-related informations, also on the pandemic issues. The alerts were sent out by the SMS by the mobile operators. And also there are also third-party apps, digital apps, which also provide the track and trace information as well as on the alert system. So for Myanmar, we are using all the approaches, digital, non-digital, as well as traditional broadcasting platforms to get information across the rural populations. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Cybersecurity has been just touched on as a word, really, when in your presentations, and I know network security was talked about specifically as well. What are the initiatives that are put in place? Do all those things belong at a national governmental level, or are they also seen as issues that deal with consumers and citizens, obviously, if they're dealt with at a government level anyway? I mean, where do those sorts of issues sit within your agencies?
Andrea, I'll have a stab at that. So I think there's probably a continuum of issues that go through from the discussion we had with scam and spams earlier into the cybersecurity space, because what we see coming across networks can be a variety of those, and some of them, such as scams and spam, can be an entry point into a cybersecurity issue. Our Department of Home Affairs is responsible in a general sense for the cybersecurity landscape and has been doing an enormous amount of work with the industry, particularly on things like critical infrastructure protection and resilience. And we have very close relationships with our colleagues in both Home Affairs and the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, both on our own cybersecurity posture within the organisation, but also on how networks are protected and the interplay between our work in areas such as consumer protection and their work in the cyberspace. So it's a matter of strong coordination across government.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll come back to this issue about cooperation, collaboration. Anne, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. We look at it from different levels in terms of layers. For example, when we talk about the protection of our critical infrastructure and protecting the holistic, leadership approach towards network and cybersecurity, it is at the national level. There is a leadership. And we also have to look at it from the network perspective. So network operators are also involved in protecting their customers and the infrastructures on top of their layers. And more specifically, it is the most important thing is consumers, because what we see as a response to COVID pandemic is, more incidents regarding on the third elements, the lowest layer on the consumer level. The devices are not well protected and they are subject to cyber incidents. So it is more important at the consumer level to provide the knowledge to protect themselves from the cyber incidents. So we work together with the industry as well as the Network Security Agency, National Network Security Agency, in terms of collaborating in these matters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. And okay, in Taiwan, luckily, the government has the rulemaker has built up an act to put on a duty to all critical infrastructure operators. So currently in Taiwan, there are eight categories of the so-called critical infrastructure. And yeah, NCC has unluckily two of them, the telecommunication and the mass media. So for every operator who run a business open to public, the public service, they have to hand out the cybersecurity protection plan. And yes, and this is start from 2020, July. So, and also for the first time, NCC hold up the 5G auction, also around 2 years ago. Yes, and we urge every applicant to hand out the cybersecurity protection plans, and also they now they have to report if there are some vulnerability and also some cybersecurity attack happens. They yes, they have duty to report to NCC or to corresponding agencies. And on the consumer side, also we try to protect in higher level if the device is used in public service, like set-top box for cable TV operator. Yes, we ask every set-top box to be checked and verified before they are allowed to sell to production to consumers. But for cell phone, for smartphone, then it's not a duty. But somehow we do verify like 10 cell phone every year, and we will publish the result of the building APP to see if there are security vulnerabilities.
Okay, that's and the whole issue about vulnerabilities and reporting into the NCC, I would think is quite an interesting area, and what you can do with that. But maybe that's something Amanda can put on an agenda for the next time. I've had a question in asking for tips really on how we might expand on international collaboration between regulators. And I did say we'd come back to collaboration and cooperation. All of you have talked about working intra-agency within your countries, but also reaching out internationally. And of course, the IIC is an international forum, a truly international forum. So perhaps we can just run through, I'll go in the order we spoke on very briefly, any tips for increasing international collaboration and how you make it effective, if I can use that word. So may I start with you, Aun?
Thank you very much. Again, I think with the digital transformations, which has no boundaries, or the international collaboration is the key. And for us in the region, we have what we call as ASEAN Regulators Council. So regulators of the 10 ASEAN countries sit together and discuss the pertaining issues regarding not only on the issues of cybersecurity and consumer protections, but a whole range of cooperations in digital transformation and digital cooperation issues. And we also work with the Asia Pacific telecommunity. So these are the channels that we usually have, apart from the bilateral arrangements with some of our neighboring countries. So yes, of course, this is very important. In not only collaboration in terms of exchange of information, but also in terms of helping each other, when we have issues. Because the cyber issues doesn't have any national boundaries. And it is very important that we get information in advance, and then we also share the information in advance with our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Teng.
Okay. Of course, NCC is very aggressive in joining any international events, but I just popped up my mind that how could I further improve this situation? And I think that there's one case I think of, the Starlink service. So it is trying to enter the Taiwan market recently, and the NCC is also cooking the corresponding act, and we wish that every rule will be published in the first half year. And by allowing this kind of foreign operator, then it will increase the chance for the NCC, the Taiwan, to have the conversation with the operator, to the regulator of the company resides, the operator resides in like the US or maybe someday United Kingdom or other Australia, I don't know. And yes, I think that will be a very if NCC could open or lower the threshold for a foreign operator to enter, maybe it will also increase the frequency for NCC to cooperate with the foreign regulator. That's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you're actually saying market forces will drive international collaboration and technology, and the increase in technology.
Because, for example, on social media, now we know that no single government could beat this big hand company. So we have to, yeah. So that's what I say. Yeah, they drive the cooperation of governments.
Okay, thank you. Nerida, over to you. I know this is a big area for you.
It is, and I agree. I think part of the impetus for international collaboration will be because we're dealing with companies and organisations that deal on a global scale. And while we might have different views on different issues in jurisdictions, I think there's a commonality of views on areas such as scam or as Dr. Ten mentioned, the introduction of LEOs into our jurisdictions. We've missed the IIC. We've missed being together with your members. What it has compelled us to do, though, is to actively search out different ways of engaging with our colleagues internationally, and we've developed a number of forums both domestically and internationally to discuss the areas of common interest. A lot of those have been about online regulation and the challenges of online regulation, because that seems to affect us all. So it has prompted us to be more active, to reach out to our fellow regulators and establish, how do you make it stick? Well, we've made it stick by a commitment by all of us for regular meetings, for engagement, not just at the senior levels, but right through our organisations on particular topics, and not just coming together to make decisions, but to share information and background and ideas. And that's worked very successfully alongside with the MOUs we have for various countries. I agree, though, I think that this is an area that will only need to increase in coming years, particularly where some of the formal international environments, such as things like the ITU, may not be able to keep up as quickly as new things come to market as it has been able to do previously. And it may be that bilateral discussions and trilaterals will need to take place to facilitate innovation in the market.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Wonderful note to end on. We touched briefly on literacy. We've touched on all sorts of consumer issues. We've touched on networks. We've touched on natural disasters, the pandemic. So it's been a wonderful opening session. I'm very, very grateful to all my panelists. Thank you very much.